All right, guys, how worried should LSU be? And how about opposing defensive coordinators now that Jimbo and Bobby Petrino are definitely on the same page? And we got Bama and Texas. Quinn Ewers taking on Jalen Milroe. Should be a good one. All that coming up here on Up to the Second College Football, Season 3, Episode 2, presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors, which is your college football tailgate destination and official sports good and outdoor retailer of the SEC. Stop by your local Academy store or academy.com and gear up for your game day today there at Academy Sports and Outdoors. All right, so Billy and Caroline are going to go around the SEC here coming up in a bit. But before we do that, my talk with Alyssa Lang of the SEC Network and ESPN, as we also chit-chat about all things happening in the SEC and, of course, that offensive coordinator at Texas A&M.
Need a new grill? Academy Sports and Outdoors is the destination for your outdoor cooking needs. With our free in-store assembly and pre-assembled grills and smokers, buy online at academy.com and pick up in-store. So keep those grilling plans at Academy Sports and Outdoors.
Let's get our next guest, Alyssa Lang from ESPN and SEC Network. She's at all the big games. She'll be at Georgia Ball State this upcoming weekend. Alyssa, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Thank you guys for having me. I'm well. We've got SEC football back and actual game storylines to talk about rather than recycled fall camp things. So life couldn't be better right now.
As a talk show host, my job has become so much easier as opposed to recycling the same takes. But I'm kind of recycling a thought with a new spin, all right? So a lot of new OCs out there. Some struggled, some did not. Maybe a shameless plug for what Bobby Petrino was able to do with A&M. Just your thoughts on some of those new situations out there. Obviously, the Clemson game from the other night, that was a rough one, at least from an offensive perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with what you just said about Texas A&M, right? I think so many of us A&M fans, probably included, breathing a huge sigh of relief in that everything we've been saying for the last few months feels like it's coming to fruition as far as what that offense looked like and what the play calling was going to look like from Bobby Petrino. I mean, going back and watching that game on Sunday when I got back from where I was in Starkville, I was impressed just from the fact that, okay, we are starting from the baseline that Texas A&M should be starting at this year. When you go back to last year and you look at some of those non-conference early games, you're not putting up the type of numbers that you put up this past weekend in your opener. So for Texas A&M to do that, to take care of business in that way, and for Connor Wigman to run the offense in the way that we saw him do so, spreading the ball around to so many different targets, having that balance that you'd like to see, I'm buying stock on Texas A&M even more than I was before in fall camp, which I was cautiously doing, but now I'm drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit faster rather than sipping it as I was in fall camp. I was also impressed by where I was in Starkville with new offensive coordinator Kevin Barbay there at Mississippi State in getting ready for week 2, looking at some of the SEC stats. I about fell over even though I was there to see that Mississippi State as a team leads the league right now in rush yards. When was the last time we could say, I know it's been 1 week, but for State fans who like to get back to that traditional State style offense, the fact that they ran the football for over 200 yards in week 1, Woody Marks by himself, 2 touchdowns and well over 100 yards. I thought what Kevin Barbay has installed over the past few months took a little while for Will Rogers and the offense to look comfortable and for them to get it off the ground. But by the time we got into the second half, it looked a lot more seamless. And I was really impressed by such a quick turnaround from the air raid to more of a pro style offense.
Alyssa, I was actually really impressed with Jalen Milroe, and I shouldn't say that. I mean, it's Alabama. I kind of expect it to work out eventually, but he did not look, at least in one game, like the quarterback we saw last year, and that's also a new offensive coordinator situation.
Yeah, and I think we were all sort of cautiously sitting back here saying, okay, what does this quarterback room in general look like? And I don't obviously know what's happening behind the walls in Tuscaloosa with Nick Saban, but part of me was kind of going, was there really a quarterback battle happening here based on what we saw from him in their opener? To your point, from last year to this year, we knew he had the athleticism. We knew he could create and extend plays with his legs, but could he be a passer? Could he be a patient passer? Could he work the pocket and run the offense the way that Nick Saban wants him to do so? I saw that. I think we all did. As soon as that game started on Saturday night, that bad snap early on, he makes something happen. He takes it in for a touchdown. Not only did he do that, he looked accurate. He looked like he was going through his reads, making sure he was scanning the entirety of the field to make sure he was making the right play. He looked like a smart quarterback out there, which is what we've all been waiting for, I think, to see if Jalen Milroe could take that next step as the starter. I'm still a little confused as to why Nick Saban hasn't come out and said, yes, he's our QB1 for the remainder of the season, but maybe a little bit of mental gymnastics there as far as everything he said in the offseason. I want a guy to make a decision for me. I want somebody to grab the reins and be the starter, be the leader on this team. So from what I saw, from what I think everybody saw, Milroe is heading in the right direction, and that's scary for the rest of the SEC.
Well, now it sets up a Quinn Ewers versus Jalen Milroe, and if Quinn plays the way he played last year before he got hurt, and Jalen can play at the level we just saw, sets up, you know how the talk show host circuit goes. I'm one of them. Heisman talk after this. So just your thoughts on that game coming up and the importance of it.
Yeah, it's so interesting, especially when you look at what's on the line in this game when it comes to the college football playoff. If Bama wins this game, their projections, percentages to make the playoff don't really change. But if Bama loses this game, Texas takes a huge step forward in what they can do throughout the rest of their schedule and potentially trying to make it to a college football playoff. So obviously this is one of those swing games that we could be talking about towards the end of the season, depending on how either team's seasons go from here. But yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to the quarterback situation for both schools. I mean, Quinn Ewers goes down last year early in that game after having a pretty successful outing up until that injury. Bryce Young is really the reason they win that football game last year on the road by 1 point. Bryce Young constantly putting that offense in a situation to score points or to take them off the field with the lead. Bryce Young's mental impact on that team, I don't think could ever be overstated enough. Can Jalen Milroe show us that he has that it factor in staying cool, calm, and collected, but also performing under pressure? He'll have the crowd on his side, obviously, with this one being in Tuscaloosa, but I do think it comes down to which quarterback can remain the calmest under pressure.
Let's talk about teams that maybe should be worried. LSU, not the fact that they lost to Florida State, because they lost last year, and they obviously won the West later on. But the way they lost, how eye-popping was that?
I was surprised, honestly, and I know for a lot of different reasons, and the conversation raged across social media. It felt like one of the things that I thought was a surefire thing I was confident in coming in was the connection between Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors. And it felt at times that they were just not on the same page, whether it was timing, route running, decision-making, whatever it was. I thought that was something that might take a step forward coming into game one here in Jaden Daniels' year 2 with Malik Neighbors. That's something that maybe we just chalk up to a week 1 thing. Maybe it gets better after this. Who knows? I'm not pushing the panic button there. But I, along with everybody else, many others at least, was sitting there wondering, you have a guy who was a quarterback terrorist in the SEC last year, and you're lining him up off the ball. You're playing him as an off-ball linebacker in Harold Perkins. That's what I don't understand. And I understand potentially the game plan of you did that against Alabama last year and it worked. Maybe we start the game that way. That sure makes sense. I think the coaching staff at LSU is very intelligent. They know what they're doing. But in the second half, when Jordan Travis needed to be pressured, because he really wasn't much of the evening, a couple of times LSU gets decent pressure on him, why not put Perkins back at edge when at times he looked maybe confused playing linebacker? So that for me was one of the more disappointing elements of that game. Coaches preach all the time. It should be simple, right? Play your 11 best players and put them in positions where their talent shines through. Harold Perkins' talent is being a ball hawk. His talent is getting after quarterbacks and making them have a really bad day. He wasn't able to do that. The numbers show, I think, 28 snaps in coverage and 7 rushing the passer on Sunday night. That, to me, is something that I don't understand. And I'll be very interested to see if that changes moving forward. But all that to say, I'm not hitting panic on LSU yet. They haven't been very good in season openers for the last, 4 or 5 years at this point. They've got the talent there, but they've got some more to prove for sure moving forward.
Not an SEC team, but it was eye-popping. Clemson, what happened against Duke. And I give a lot of props to the old DC at A&M, Mike Elko, and what he's able to do with Duke. But how surprising was it to see their struggles? Turnovers were part of the story, but just the offense didn't look that different, and you would expect it to look different with Garrett Riley.
Yeah, and honestly, I wasn't that surprised. If I'm being honest with you, yesterday somebody asked me, "Is the SEC down after South Carolina lost to North Carolina and LSU loses to Florida State?" And I said, "No, I don't think the SEC is down. I think they just happen to play the two best teams that the ACC has this year." And somebody said, "Well, what about Clemson? Clemson's a top 10 team. They're playing Duke on Monday night." I said, I don't think Clemson's for real. There's just nothing that screams realness, for if you will, for me about Clemson. And I think you saw that on display last night. You look at the recruiting numbers and people are breaking down the blue chip prospects on Clemson's team versus Duke's team. I wonder if maybe not being an aggressive portal recruiter is going to catch up with Dabo Swinney. He's been somebody who's been pretty adamant about wanting to stay traditional as far as recruiting out of high school, and that is very important. But Clemson is not one of those schools that has been a headliner as far as pulling important positions and important players out of the transfer portal. A lot of the teams that we're talking about as far as vying for national championships are doing that, and they're building these teams that have talent in every surface, every position group, every room of these football teams. And Clemson just didn't scream with that it factor to me on paper. And last night, I think they showed a little bit of that too.
Alyssa, let's talk about the game you'll be covering, Georgia and Ball State. Carson Beck era has started. What is the vibe around that team? Some of your preps getting ready for it. Did they like his first performance?
Yeah, from what I can tell, obviously we haven't talked to the coaches yet. We'll do that on Friday, day before the game. But, Kirby Smart, I don't know if he's ever going to tell you that he liked the performance of somebody. He always has feedback to give you as far as what we did wrong, what we can do better, where we can improve from here. I think the overall vibe, at least from social media, which I know doesn't tell the whole story, but from Georgia fans, was that why didn't we show more offensively? It didn't look creative at all. We went from Todd Monken to Mike Bobo, and it all looks different. You don't need to show everything against UT Martin. It's okay to not show your entire playbook. You went out and you won by 40 something, however much it was, and you didn't have to show anything. There weren't major injuries. You get Carson Beck live game reps for the first time as a starting quarterback. You checked every box that I think any national championship contender would want to check in week one against a team like that. So I kind of expect more of the same against Ball State. I don't know how creative they're going to get offensively again. If Brock Bowers is on the field, how creative do you really need to get, right? Mekhi Muse, I think, showed why Kirby Smart has been raving about him from the spring. That guy is fast. He's got hands. He can make you miss. He's going to be somebody that we talk about throughout the course of the season. But if I'm Georgia at this point, I'm not changing too much, I don't think, from week one to week two. Again, remains to be seen what the coaching staff tells us. But I thought Carson Beck had a nice day. He looked comfortable. He settled in. Guys are buying into him as a leader of this football team. And again, they're confident in what they have. They don't need to show off much of anything, I don't think, before South Carolina comes to town.
Alyssa, we appreciate it. Great stuff, and we'll be watching you on TV here soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
At Academy Sports and Outdoors, bikes for the whole family are just a click away. Buy online at academy.com with our free in-store assembly. Your next set of wheels, plus helmets, pads, and water bottles will be waiting for you at our in-store pickup counter. Get to the fun faster with our in-store pickup and free assembly at Academy Sports and Outdoors.
All right, good stuff there with Alyssa Lang there from the ESPN and SEC Network. Now we're going to go on to Billy Liucci and Caroline Fenton as they go all around the SEC.
Welcome into the Week 2 edition of Up to the Second, brought to you by our friends over at Academy. Caroline Fenton, Billy Liucci. Billy, it's very fitting that we both have black on today because we are celebrating the funeral of my LSU Tigers after the absolute butt whooping that happened in the second half against Florida State.
Well, I will agree with the butt whooping part, and I want to talk to you about that because your Tigers have taken them a little more consistently than my LSU friends on Twitter would like to admit, and I think it's an issue worth talking about, trolling and fun aside. But I will say how quickly, Caroline, you forget where you were at this time a year ago at the hands of a much worse Florida State team, in my opinion, a Florida State team that wasn't even close. And even though it turned into a butt whipping the other night, clearly a much better LSU football team than the one that I watched Brian Kelly put on the field a year ago in the Superdome. So I wouldn't feel that bad if I was an LSU fan, because I just watched the game kind of get away from them, and drop passes were a big part of that. But I will say, after watching that game in its entirety, two things. Well, I watched Clemson last night. That combination
was
of
brutal.
watching Florida State and what they did to LSU in the second half, and then watching Clemson, that combo makes me think there is not a team with a clearer path to the national title, or to the playoff anyway, than the Florida State Seminoles. I think even more so than, obviously, Texas with Alabama in the way. Even a team like Oklahoma, who doesn't play in Alabama in the non-conference, but they have to go through, Texas, Kansas State, and I just think Florida State's path is looking more manageable than anyone's, especially when you look at that football team. That is an SEC West built football team with real players, a 6-year quarterback, playmakers, transfers, line of scrimmage, elite pass rusher. They're going to be tough to beat. And LSU ran into a buzzsaw. But my problem with LSU is they've been blown out, I think, 4 of their last 10 games, going back to the Tennessee game. That's what would concern me if I'm an LSU fan right now. And I don't think it's that bad. They won the West. A&M and a lot of teams haven't done that since Nick Saban got there. And they won it in year 1 under Kelly. I just think they won so many close games last year, and people overlooked how bad they lost to a 5-7 A&M team, and how bad they were beaten at home by Tennessee, and then Georgia, and now Florida State. I think people are overlooking that Kelly did inherit a bit of a rebuild in both culture and, in terms of getting it back to that overwhelming talent that you went to school watching LSU play with.
And I think that's the thing, is if it was a close loss where LSU looked good and you just got beat by a good team, whether it was Florida State had the ball last and scored last, and the clock ran out and you ran out of opportunities, I could have lived with that, because I could have stepped away from that and said, you played well against a good team and you have good things to encourage you moving forward. But that was just one example of a pattern of losses with Brian Kelly. You mentioned it. I mean, 5 losses in the Brian Kelly era. The only close loss was against Florida State last year, and that came at the hands of special teams mistakes, dumb penalties. Jaden Daniels couldn't throw the football. So you're looking really at 5 ugly losses. And yeah, you got some good wins thrown in there as well. But that concerns me, that this team's not making adjustments, that this team is sticking to the game plan even when the game plan isn't working. And you mentioned, you should feel better now about this loss than you were a year ago. And I do, because this team's another year older. I think we know some of the tendencies, and we can pick up on the things that this team needs to work on. We've seen the talent of this team on full display. But the fact that there are still mistakes happening for this team and with this coaching staff, the same mistakes that were being made last season, that's the concern to me.
Yeah.
Muffed a punt on Sunday.
I know. I couldn't
special
believe it.
teams still shooting you in the foot. Jaden Daniels still struggling in the passing game. All of these things that we were told and we were promised were going to be worked on and fixed in the offseason, and they were still hurting LSU. And overall, the most discouraging thing to me is most of the things that went wrong. There were dropped passes, and the offensive line didn't do a great job of protecting in the middle. Those fall on the players. For the most part, when I look to the biggest things that went wrong for this team, it falls on coaching.
Yeah.
It fell on play calls. It fell on the fact that LSU just did not look confident or motivated in the second half. That falls on Brian Kelly and this coaching staff. And that doesn't make you feel great moving forward.
I would have thought, if you told me before the game, and you and I may have even talked about it, I thought the coaching and Brian Kelly versus Norvell, I thought the coaching check mark went on the LSU side of the ledger. And I would have thought
advantage LSU.
I think we underestimated Norvell. I think he's been good everywhere he's been. He you know, what happened there after Jimbo, what a mess that turned into with the coach in between that they went and got out of Oregon, and that was a disaster. So Norvell inherited, a rougher situation. He's turned it around pretty quickly. He's done a great job in the portal, which is a lot more than we can say about Dabo Swinney. He might have.
Dabo is going to hurt himself by not adapting to the times. NIL, transfer portal, all of the above. That's hurting this team, and you can tell.
It's his ego, and he could have used a Keon Coleman last night in a big way. I want to talk a little bit.
We all could use a Keon Coleman.
Yeah, we could. And, he canceled his A&M visit, I think, day of, the day he was supposed to come here. But I think the Aggies look pretty good at receiver. Anyone could use a Keon Coleman, but they looked really good at the position the other night. We'll talk about them in a minute. I want to close out LSU by asking you this.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the jury's definitely out. Like, this is not going to be a bad LSU team. The question is, will they truly, at the end of the day, be sitting there alongside Alabama or a dark horse? Will they go into that A&M game playing for a shot at an SEC West title, or are they going to be like so many teams in this league and fall in that 4-4, 5-3 range in the league, which will not sit well with the folks in Baton Rouge? I personally think it's not acceptable, just like average years here in College Station are not acceptable, especially with LSU's history and what their standard is. But I think if you really dig through it, if they went 5-3 in the SEC, no one in Baton Rouge would be happy. But I think I could understand why it would happen if they don't have any more of these bad losses. If they lost close in Tuscaloosa, if they lost, you think about A&M, Arkansas, Ole Miss, Auburn, Mississippi State. Do they play Kentucky this year?
They play Missouri.
Missouri, they should win that for sure. But, I mean, there's a lot of games that you look at and you say, who else do they get from the East? It's
Florida.
No, they should win those two.
Yeah.
They did.
Based off what we saw Thursday night.
They better not do worse than 5-3 in the conference. We'll put it that way. But even if they went 6-2 in the league and finished 9-3, some people would see that as no real progress. That probably wouldn't include a West title this year. Who knows? Maybe it does. But where do you come off on Jaden Daniels? And what's your biggest question mark about this football team in terms of personnel right now and their ability between the lines outside of Brian Kelly and motivation? Mine, number one, by the way, is the misuse of Harold Perkins.
That is football malpractice
to
put Harold Perkins in that position. He is the best player on your team and might be the best defensive player in the country. And you're putting him an inside linebacker as a spy to where he's a non-factor. I mean, that is, especially when you're without your top defensive lineman and Mason Smith.
Yeah.
I mean, that is coaching malpractice. And that was something that Brian Kelly talked about in his Tuesday press conference. Was there's been a lot of conversations behind closed doors about where he is best fit.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that that's Brian Kelly's wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of, way of saying, we're going to put Harold back into a place where it is just see ball, kill ball. And it's what he does best. So I'm with you. And that's one of those week one growing pains that you have a game plan, you have these things in place in the off season that you think are going to make your team better. And sometimes you're just wrong.
Yeah.
And that's fine, but you have to adjust. If this defensive coaching staff, if Brian Kelly doesn't adjust and continues to try and fit a square peg in a round hole with Harold Perkins, then you deserve to lose games.
Right.
That's true. To answer your question, I
Jaden.
don't think that LSU is going to be competing for, a West title going into that game against Texas A&M because LSU didn't take enough of the gimmies against Florida State.
Wow.
They 5 trips to the red zone in the first half and you come away with 17 points. That's not good enough. I don't care if you're playing Mercer. I don't care if you're playing Alabama. I don't care if you're playing Florida State. I don't care who you're playing. That's simply not good enough. The refs kind of screwed Florida State over a good bit in the first half. I'll be the first one to admit it. I thought, man, they're really calling everything. And LSU still didn't really use that to their advantage. Florida State looked shaky. Jordan Travis looked shaky. Receivers were dropping balls in the first half. And LSU simply was not able to capitalize off of Florida State's maybe uneasiness.
Yeah.
Florida State made those necessary adjustments at the half. LSU didn't. That falls on coaching. And those are things that if this coaching staff can adjust, we'll see that come to fruition possibly against Mississippi State, but I'm not going to count on it. Where I stand with Jaden Daniels, I can't put that loss on Jaden Daniels. I can't. I think that he, more than anyone on the LSU sideline, gave LSU the best opportunity to win. LSU had 460 total yards of offense. Jaden Daniels accounted for 411 of those, either through the air or on the ground. Like I can't put that on him. There were 3 drop passes that would have been first downs, either 3 in the first half at least, that would have been first downs. That's not Jaden Daniels' fault. You hit the receiver right in the hands, the receiver drops it. That's on the receiver. There are still a lot of things that Jaden Daniels needs to improve upon that I thought that he would have improved on by now.
Yeah.
He defers to his legs too quickly. And that also falls on the offensive line, not giving him time to go through his progressions, to go through his reads. But there was an instance in particular where Jaden Daniels had all the time in the world to throw. He had a clean pocket, a wide open Brian Thomas, and he just overthrew him.
Yeah.
So, the touch and the accuracy, that has to improve. So with Jaden Daniels, I still think that he gives this team the best opportunity to win, but there are very clear limitations that he has. Other than Jaden Daniels, I think that the biggest hole for this team is the offensive line.
Same.
I mean, Florida State's defensive line was bullying up on them all night long. They need to create holes to run the football because I think this LSU offense wants to run to set up the pass. You can't set up the pass if you can't run the football. Several instances where LSU's running up the middle on 1st and 2nd down. Now you're 3rd and long, and Jaden Daniels is not the kind of passer to get you out of those 3rd and long situations.
I'm complete agreement with you here because I think the two obviously tie together. That offensive line got whipped. They got whipped badly by a really good D-line, but they still got whipped. And Jaden Daniels, as much as I admired his effort here at Kyle Field last year, kept getting hurt, kept coming back. That night was their best player on the field too. Same thing. That game went very similarly to how this one went. Big plays by the Aggie receivers last year, Moose Muhammad, running game that went wild, especially late, and just took the game over in the second half. I believe maybe both games were 17-14 at halftime, and I think both games with about 5 minutes left were 38-17. And Jaden was a warrior in both of those. My concern from an LSU fan with him is like, you hit on it. He can't give up on the pass too quickly because that guy does not need to be scrambling around, through SEC defenses over the course of a long season. But I'm with you. He's their best option. Carolina A&M seems to have found their best option. We talked a week ago about Connor Wigman.
Yep.
We've talked it to death here, but this is a show that we're talking SEC, and we're starting with A&M and LSU every week. So let's talk. Let's chat. I'm sure next week we'll lead off with the Aggies, good, better, indifferent. They've got the big game this weekend. So let's start with what you saw, A&M New Mexico versus, and then we'll transition into Miami and that big game this weekend at Hard Rock Stadium.
And I'm glad you bring up Connor Wigman because when I was watching LSU on Sunday night, my thought was if Jaden Daniels and Connor Wigman get into a shootout, LSU's losing that shootout every single day and twice on Sundays. And I think that was my biggest takeaway was Connor Wigman's willingness to throw the deep ball and accuracy with the deep ball. With a younger quarterback that doesn't have a ton of experience, going for that, the home run kind of ball might be a little bit intimidating, especially so early in the season when you're still learning the line, you're still learning the receivers. And I know that this isn't Connor Wigman's first rodeo, but still, he's fairly green into the starting quarterback job. I loved to see his willingness to go deep. And those receivers, I went into the season knowing that Evan Stewart and Aniyah Smith were going to be weapons. But Noah Thomas was really one to me that I thought, okay, all right, that's not a name that I'm going to forget because you forced me to not forget your name.
Yeah.
So overall, I thought the offensive line looked much improved. I thought Connor Wigman looked confident. I thought those receivers were right on cue and they had a good communication. Now I want to see it against a better team.
Yeah.
Because
no question.
you got the job done against a team that you should have gotten business handled with. And good job. You passed the test. Now on to Miami. I'm eager to see how this team reacts in week 2.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned Wigman's willingness just to cut it loose, and you saw that against LSU. You saw it early against Ole Miss. That Ole Miss game, 4 touchdowns, no picks, and I think it was a 31-28 or 34-28 loss, a close loss there, down to the wire. The dude's a gunslinger. He is not afraid to cut loose, and he knows those receivers. Noah Thomas is a guy they've been talking about since he got here. He was just banged up last year early, and then I think he scored in that Ole Miss game. He scored against UMass. He's a known weapon here across the street in College Station. He was not throughout the SEC. Evan Stewart is. He had a monster game, and they did all that. Mind you, Wigman and Noah had a 40-yard bomb called back on a holding penalty. Evan Stewart almost made a sensational 40-yard catch that just fell out of his hands. They make those 2 plays count. You're talking about 250-yard, 5-touchdown afternoon by those 2 receivers in less than 3 quarters. Yeah. So, again, you nailed it with the opponent thing. That's most of the SEC this weekend. A&M, New Mexico, Ole Miss, Mercer, Alabama, Middle Tennessee. Who was it that played UMass? Was that Auburn? Yeah, and
Auburn, UMass.
Mississippi State played Alea. Everybody did
and
it.
Tennessee played Virginia, but Virginia is not a good team.
No, Virginia's about as bad, which is shocking. I was watching that game thinking, how bad has Virginia gotten? Were you at that game? You were at that game.
I was at that game. Mm-hmm.
Virginia looked awful.
Awful.
I've got a bone to pick with Virginia, too. In the first half, they're down either 7-0 or 10-3. It was competitive. It wasn't going to be. You could tell.
It wasn't a great first half for Tennessee.
No. And Virginia had the ball like 4th and 2 or 3 from like the Tennessee 42-yard line. Down a score early, maybe down 10 points, but I think just 1 score, and they punt it. You're Virginia. You're in Neyland Stadium.
Have an opportunity.
You're a coach that's trying to establish a culture. Yeah, go for it. Score. Even if you end up getting blown out, make it 10-10 or 13-10, whatever it would have been, 7-7 early in that game. Get that crowd restless. Put a little. It drives me crazy when I see coaches, not take the shot. And that is, even though it was New Mexico, that is the thing I liked most about what I saw from the Aggie offense on Saturday. They took shots. They were the aggressor from snap one. They went for it on a 4th down early. New Mexico stacked the box, dared them to hit deep balls. They said, okay, we'll hit deep balls. We'll throw them. We're going to complete them. They didn't let the play clock run down. They were fast tempo. So even though it was the opponent, you saw some things that you really liked, including, like you said, those receivers.
And even with, A&M had over 100 rushing yards.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how many, but over 100 rushing yards. But it's still, I feel like those to me were kind of sneaky rush yards. And I stepped away from that game thinking, I'm so glad that it wasn't just handoff, run the ball, because Texas A&M is going to have success running the ball. But with an opponent that you simply are just so much better than, let it rip.
Agreed.
That was another one of my frustrations from that Tennessee-Virginia game. Handoff, check down to the running back. Like, I'm sorry, you're Tennessee, and you've got a quarterback with an absolute cannon of an arm. Let it rip. You're going to beat them. And if you let it rip and the receivers drop it, or it's a bad pass, then fine.
Yeah,
you've got film on
practice.
it. You can work on it going into week 3 against Florida. But, yeah, I appreciated the, Bobby Petrino's decision to just, hey, give him the ball and let it rip.
I'll be really interested this weekend. Miami is talking. Their fans are talking. Their player. There's a lot of noise coming out of Miami. They know they have to have this football game. They know that Miami has not won one of these really important non-conference games. And look, A&M was 5-7 last year. Miami came in here. It was 17-9. It was a very physical football game. I think this game will be even more physical. This is going to be a check of Texas A&M's mental and physical toughness that was lacking all too often last year. I have heard and I've seen and heard enough that I'm confident that that is not the case this year, but you don't know it till you're hit in the mouth. And they're going to get hit in the mouth in South Florida Saturday night. Jimbo Fisher knows this. He has coached against Miami countless times. Mm-hmm. The A&M players know it because it was a physical, like I said, 17-9 football game last year. I think it was 10-3 at halftime. It was a slugfest, and I think both teams are a lot better in the trenches this year. So this will be a great test. Look, if you're Texas A&M and you want to go in the SEC and be a contender in the West, which maybe other people have lower expectation for this program. I know Jimbo and the guys don't. They want to be back. I say back. They'd like to jump up better than before and maybe get back to where it looked like they were heading after that 2020 season, which is the last time they played in South Florida. They went to the Orange Bowl, played, beat North Carolina. It looked like the program was on a rocket ascent. Been, 13-11 or whatever it is since. It hasn't been what we thought. This is a chance to get it back. I don't know if Miami's going to be 10-2 this year or if they're going to be, 8-4 or 7-5. But on Saturday, with the whole country watching as a tune-up, they've got to go in there and again, I think the Miami Hurricanes are built like an SEC West team. NFL athletes all over the field. They're physical, they're fast, and I think they're one of those teams that if you let them get momentum, they'll be hard to beat. If you keep them down, I think the Aggies win. I'm not saying they're world beaters. This is not the U like it used to be.
Right. This is not the Miami that we're used to thinking about.
No, but I think they're going to be a lot better than last year with Shannon Dawson. They went and got the DC from Marshall. Van Dyke came back after a disappointing season. I think, right. and they're really strong on the offensive and defensive line. So we'll see. It's going to be a real test. But it's a game, Caroline, that I think A&M in year 6 under Jimbo, with the players and the talent they've got on campus, they should go on the road and get a meaningful win away from Kyle Field. And I think the last one they got was in that very city in the Orange Bowl 2 years ago. They haven't won on the road really since.
And it's a gettable win.
Yeah.
Miami's an improved team. I expect them to be an improved team, but also so is Texas A&M. And if we're just going to talk about pure talent, Miami's going to have talent. Miami's always going to have good players out of South Florida, out of the state of Florida. But Texas A&M just has more. I don't know how many games Texas A&M is going to play in which their opponent has more talented players.
Bama, LSU, let's call it a push. I mean,
and those are probably the only two. And we can go through the rosters. We can do all that out that all day long. But just based off of feeling and based off of my knowledge of both of those rosters, Texas A&M is a more talented team, and that's a gettable game.
Yeah.
You win that game, there's a serious possibility that A&M's going into Alabama 5-0.
Yeah.
And I think that this Miami matchup is the perfect balance of gettable, winnable game and also confidence booster.
Right.
Because you can win a game against whoever it might be, like Nowheresville State University. I don't know how much confidence that can give a team going into the next week.
Yeah.
You beat a team like Miami in their own hometown, that gives you all the confidence in the world. So I think that's a huge benchmark game for Texas A&M. Is you can do it against New Mexico and you look damn good doing it. Mm-hmm. Let's see you do it against the next level of competition.
Speaking of benchmarks, just A&M beat Bama in 20 or 21, beat LSU in 22, beat Miami in 22. You have a chance now this year. You're playing Miami, Bama, LSU again, and you're opening next year with Notre Dame. So in the next 12 games, A&M's playing Miami, Alabama, LSU, and Notre Dame. You want to talk about a chance to really start to establish your credibility and brand around the country is to continue to beat these blue blood name programs when you get cracks at them. Now, I understand you've got to beat the Mississippi schools and you got to do that too. But I'm saying these opportunities really register, especially on the Saturday where you're probably the second biggest game and you're the build up to the biggest game of the weekend, which is our SEC game of the week. The Texas Longhorns going into Bryant-Denny Stadium to take on the Alabama Crimson Tide. What are your thoughts on this one? This is, as much as I troll the Longhorns and stuff, this is a massive game for the Longhorns. It's a massive game for Nick Saban and Bama. And I just think it's one of those out-of-conference contests that's just – this is why college football is great. I hate that these conferences just keep getting bigger and bigger. We won't see them as much anymore. But this is a terrific matchup. I don't care if you're an Aggie or if you're an Auburn fan or whatever. You got to admit this is a big one Saturday night in T-Town.
I looked at the schedule for the full season and said we have 2 playoff games in September, LSU, Florida State, and Texas, Alabama. Yeah. Now, going into this season, before we saw either of these 2 teams play, when Jalen Milroe was named the starting quarterback, I thought Texas is going to win that game. Yeah. Because with Jalen Milroe, Alabama's bread and butter is going to be running the football. Like, that's what they're going to want to do. It's the same. I kind of have a similar feeling with Jalen Milroe right now, based off the sample size that we have of him, of Jaden Daniels, that if you have to get in a shootout, if you're playing a team with a quarterback that can sling it for 450 yards a game, you're going to lose because you don't have a quarterback that can keep up with that kind of passing game. I don't think Jalen Milroe can do that based off of what we have seen. And we saw that week 1 with Alabama. And Tommy Rees, I think, called a great game that I think he emphasized the strengths of Jalen Milroe, ran the football a lot, but also kind of pushed his comfort zone a little bit, made him throw the ball around the yard a little bit, made him get comfortable with those receivers. But you can do that against Middle Tennessee. Is Texas's defense going to allow you to do that? Because Texas is going to want to make Jalen Milroe one-dimensional. Yeah. I mean, that's a physical team on both sides of the ball at the line of scrimmage. That's a tough defensive line, and that is a tough as nails offensive line. Texas isn't going to let Alabama run the football. If I'm Sark, my plan is we're going to take the ground game away from you, and we're going to force you to throw the football. And if you can beat us doing that, hats off to you. Then you're the better team.
I'll tell you what. I think you're absolutely right. I think Texas's offensive line is going to be tested. The Longhorns had Bijan in that game last year, and it made you very, very scared to be light in that box, and he was really he could take advantage and kill you. He was also so elite in the as a receiver out of the backfield. Quinn Ewers has got to, last year early in that game, the reason Texas was giving Bama fits was Ewers was connecting down the field on the deep ball. He has been so wildly inconsistent. And there's Texas's hope certificate, the word inconsistent. Because for as bad as he looked throwing the ball down the field against Rice and in some games last year, he also has been dialed in and throwing dimes at times. And so you just don't know when it's going to come. Right. But in order to do it, Texas's O-line is going to have to hold up. They did a good job in that contest last year with Will Anderson. So I don't know how good that O-line is, and we'll find out after Saturday. It's kind of like the A&M O-line. We're going to find out after Saturday how good they are. And I am comparing Miami's defensive front to Bama. I think Miami's got real players up front. Bama's got more, and they've got more depth. But both these O-lines are going to determine if the Texas teams can win this weekend. And because if Ewers is under duress, I don't think they're going to line up and run it a lot on Bama. So if Ewers is under duress, then you lose the advantage of those receivers, and an inaccurate quarterback under duress becomes a lot more inaccurate. They're going to have a tough time. If he has time to sit back and throw, I think he'll throw the ball better than he did what we saw against Rice, and I'm just thinking that because I've seen him do it. I think this is a defensive game again. I totally agree with you on that Longhorn defense. They're strong. They're strong on the defensive interior. They've got linebackers that can run. and where they're really good is in the secondary. If they can, I think they can play it base back there and keep Milroe from killing them. The one thing I'll say, if things get rolling for Bama, Nick Saban had a great season with Blake Sims at quarterback. And Nick Saban had a guy named Jalen from the Houston area as his quarterback for a couple of years there. And he was not a great thrower at Bama. He really got, to sling it around a lot more at OU under Lincoln Riley. And then with the Philadelphia Eagles, he's really come into his own as a quarterback, but also as a passer. But I remember him at Bama, and I was going, this dude is not going to win them a national title because he can't throw. He can't consistently win in the passing game. What he could do was throw a really nice deep ball. And I saw Milroe chuck some nice deep balls, and I saw him do it against Alabama, A&M last year in Tuscaloosa. If he can just connect on a couple of long balls, Nick Saban and Reese will design some run game stuff that's going to be pretty difficult for Texas to defend in terms of the zone read and read option type stuff. So that part is going to be interesting. Can Texas gobble that up early? Because if Milroe's able and the Bama backs are able to keep Texas kind of frozen there and indecisive, it'll be a long day for the Longhorns. I think this is a defensive struggle, much like we saw last year. I was thinking Texas all along. I like Bama to win this thing like 27-23. I think it's going to be a really good football game.
I was with you. I was picking Texas all along, and I don't know if that was just, trying to be different and picking against Nick Saban in Bryant-Denny Stadium. But the reason why, one of the biggest reasons why I'm leaning toward Alabama now, Rice against Texas last week turned the ball over 3 times.
Yeah.
Texas turned that into 3 points.
Yeah.
When you get opportunities like that, I don't care who it is, Rice or Alabama, you have to turn those into points.
Rice's defense.
Alabama's not going to turn the ball over 3 times. But if they turn the ball over once, you're going to win that football game if you're able to capitalize off of those mistakes.
Yeah.
Texas wasn't able to do that. To your point, is that Quinn Ewers not, getting up for Rice, but he'll get up for Alabama? Maybe so. But that concerns me.
Anything else got your interest around the league this week?
I think Texas-Alabama is the obvious choice.
Yeah.
Dare I throw in a not-so-obvious game of the week?
Please do.
Ole Miss-Tulane.
Oh, Tulane, the Green Wave.
The Green Wave.
They took
in
down
New Orleans.
That's I want to say, they're too much. They're going to be, Ole Miss is too talented. Mm-hmm. They've got Judkins in the backfield. Jackson Dart looked good this week. Lane Kiffin, SEC. They
put up 1 billion points.
But Tulane this past week, they looked really good. Is it Platt or Pratt? It's Pratt.
Pratt.
At quarterback.
Michael Pratt.
Dude, he was 14 of 15. Threw it all over the yard. Former Aggie
4 touchdowns, no interceptions.
Brown had a day. 4 TDs, no picks. I'm pretty sure that's the dude that went into Norman a few years ago and came within 30 yards of knocking off OU in Norman.
Yeah.
They beat USC last year. They beat Kansas State last year. By the way, the Big 12 champion, Kansas State Wildcat. It's pretty incredible. And I'm going to tell you something about that coach because he was right here up the road at Sam Houston. He has won every single place he's been. I think in a straight up, if I'm saying who's a better football coach, Tulane's got the better football coach. I know that's hard to believe because one guy's making millions and millions of dollars at Ole Miss. But if you flip-flopped him, I think he is, I'm telling you, Willie Fritz is the real deal. Can they beat Ole Miss? That's a lot to overcome. But, man, they beat USC. They beat Kansas State, and that's a Big 12 champion, K-State. And they should have beaten OU. And that's all in the last, less than 2 seasons. So,
yeah,
great
and
pick.
The reason why one of the biggest reasons why I still need to see more from Tulane, that I can't pick Tulane to win this game.
No, I can't either.
Tajay Spears, their running back, who ran for 200 yards against USC alone, he's gone.
Yeah.
They don't have him anymore. And I don't know who is going to be their new go-to guy. And he can catch passes out of the backfield. He is quick as a whip. He got drafted by the Tennessee Titans, so I've been covering him in training camp. He's unbelievable. He's got speed. And he's not a very big guy, but he's not afraid to bully up on any linebacker that might try to stop him. So losing him, I think, is going to be losing a big part of this offense's identity. But I would not be surprised. Like, anybody who's watching this game thinking Ole Miss, Tulane, like, whatever, Ole Miss is going to blow them out. I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, but I think it's going to be decided by a touchdown.
I'm with you. I think it's going to be a fun game to watch, and I'm going to pick Ole Miss to win it. SEC needs a weekend. They don't need Ole Miss getting upset by Tulane, and they don't need Bama losing at home to Texas or A&M losing on the road to Miami. I mean, they didn't have a great weekend. Florida, South Carolina, LSU. It's gut check time this weekend for the league, and we're part of it where we talk a big game about this conference that we're a part of, and rightfully so. It's been the dominant conference in college football. But there's been a year here or there where other teams can challenge that. I don't think we're there yet this year. But, they need to win games like they're playing this weekend. There's no doubt about it. Finally, Caroline, we do it every week, right? Let's talk let's talk our three SEC Player of the Year candidates. This is a tough week because it's kind of where it's the mix of the preseason and what happened in just one game, most of them coming against inferior opposition.
So last week, my top picks for SEC Player of the Year, I had Brock Bowers, Harold Perkins, and Quinshon Judkins. The way that LSU used Harold Perkins on Sunday against Florida State, I can't still look at him as a potential SEC Player of the Year candidate until I see it with my own eyes and I can see Brian Kelly and this coaching staff put him where he needs to be.
Yeah.
Until then, I'm putting Connor Wigman in that spot. Because last week I said, I promise I'm not a quarterback hater, but there's just not one quarterback that I can look to say, no, that guy is going to be a game changer for their team this season. I saw that, and I saw it in Connor Wigman. So he is officially on my SEC Player of the Year watch list. He played out of his mind.
I'm putting him at 3. I know it's just one game. I know it's against New Mexico, and I know he's an Aggie. So, take that with a grain of salt. But I think if we're doing the combination of what they did in a game versus what we saw last year, which, by the way, is now 13 touchdowns, no picks. He almost beat Ole Miss with a bad football team.
Yep.
He did beat LSU, and he looked sensational against New Mexico. But what I liked is just how he's playing the game, how he's not afraid. He's not afraid. He's out there, and he's got that dog in him. There's no question about it. I'm going to put him at 3 this week as well. Will Rogers, I think I'm dropping off. I like Will, or did I have Will at 4 last week? But I watch Mississippi State play. I love what Will Rogers can do on a football field. He should scare anyone in the SEC. I just think Mississippi State, A, I think they're going to lose some games, but B, I think that they're going to be a little more balanced this year. If there's something we saw on Saturday is their willingness to run the football a little more under a defensive-minded coach, obviously, in Arnett. So those numbers might come down a little. So at my number 2, I'm actually going to go at number 2. I'm going to go with KJ Jefferson at 2 still. I'm going to leave him there. I think he's played so much football. He's such a playmaker for Arkansas. And if they're going to get to, like, say, a 9-3 type season, it's going to be because, he is going to put them on his back and win some meaningful games along the way and put up some big numbers. is it Dan Enos? Is that how you say his name, the coordinator?
Yeah.
In that offense, I think he's gonna put up some big numbers. He's just played more football than pretty much anyone in this conference, and understands what it takes, kind of that week-to-week physical toll. I'm gonna keep him here long enough until they go travel to LSU in a couple weeks. I think that's going to be kind of a separation Saturday. Arkansas, LSU, A&M, Auburn. We'll start to see some things really shake out. I think Georgia plays. Is that Georgia, Tennessee? It's Georgia plays somebody good that weekend as well.
Tennessee plays Florida.
That's what it is.
3.
That's what it is.
Yeah, Tennessee plays Florida.
No,
so that's.
It's week 4 though. So anyway, we need a schedule in front of us.
I know.
But there's 3 games. There's 3 significant games that weekend. I think actually one of them might involve Ole Miss. I think it's LSU, Arkansas, A&M, Auburn, and Ole Miss. Somebody, maybe Bama. So that'll be a busy weekend. Who's your number 1? Or whoa. Who's your number 2?
My number 2 was Brock Bowers, and still gonna keep him there.
Yeah.
A bookmark with Brock Bowers because he's an just absolute freak. He had 70-something yards against UT Martin, and Georgia plays, just South Harmon Institute of Technology.
Where is that?
Throughout the rest of their schedule. So it's
wait,
hard for
South
me to look
Harmon Institute. I just caught what you just did. Thank you. I've never heard that.
I can't take credit for
I've
that.
never
That's from
heard
a movie.
Okay. From what movie?
Accepted.
Oh, that like funny movie from like when they're
Like when they make their own college.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, you can use that one. You can be credit for it. But
that
I
is
can't get, I'm not going to make Brock Bowers a SEC Player of the Year when he's doing what he's supposed to do against inferior opponents. So I actually put Jalen Milroe in.
Okay.
I know that I was just talking about, the Texas-Alabama game, how Jalen Milroe might be forced to be one-dimensional, but still, he went in against Middle Tennessee State, and he did what he needed to do. That between Jalen Milroe and Tommy Rees, that offense looked like a well-oiled machine. And Alabama very much could be. I picked them to be 10-2 on the season.
Mm-hmm.
Alabama very well could run the West and find their way back into the SEC championship.
Yeah,
I mean, we're not that far removed from Alabama being in that position. So I think that if Alabama does that, if they do run the West, it will be because of Jalen Milroe, and it all comes down to what he does against Texas. But my number 1, staying pat, Quinshon Judkins.
Same. That offense is just too built for him. They're going to lean on him when they need to. I just think, Kiffin understands how to get him touches, how to get him the ball. I think he's just going to put up such numbers that until he doesn't, I'm going to leave him up there, or until someone just starts matching him. I think for him to get past, there are some quarterbacks that could pass him because they tend to do that over running backs, especially unless Ole Miss shocks the country this year with some 11-win season. I don't know if he's going to end up there, but I think because of his body of work, the way they looked offensively to start the season, I'm going to leave him there until further notice. But tell you what, Caroline, we have two guys. You had Milroe and Wigman. I had Wigman in there. Mm-hmm. We talk about Bama. We talk about A&M. We talked a lot about LSU. If both those teams lose this weekend, the West is totally up for grabs for anybody to take. If they both win, then I think you're going to hear people around this league, people that do what we do, all our friends over at the SEC Network. I think you're going to see too soon still, but you're going to see them push Texas A&M and Alabama right up there to the top of the West, which is going to be premature because we don't know how good Miami or even Texas are. But you're going to see them push A&M right up there and say, oh, here's the new contender for Bama. It's going to be knee-jerk, just like we did with LSU and Florida State, and just like we're doing with Clemson, and to a degree people are doing with Ohio State after they didn't look great on it. It's the fun time of year and should be a fun weekend around the SEC.
Hey, I have to give credit to any Power 5 team that schedules difficult teams on their schedule.
Yeah.
That's what Texas A&M's doing with Miami, what Alabama's doing with Texas, and what LSU did with Florida State.
Yeah.
That was a tough test, and LSU failed that test. So if Texas A&M and Alabama pass those tests, then they deserve to get more of the benefit of the doubt and more of the conversation for who could potentially win the West. Now, week 3 Once we start to get into SEC play, those conversations might change. They probably will change. But until then, you pass those tests, then you get the credit for it.
Caroline, take us home. Take us out.
Appreciate everyone tuning in week 2 of Up to the Second, presented by our friends at Academy. Billy, safe travels to Miami. Are you going to the game?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, safe travels, and I'll put all of South Beach on alert.
You close that thing out so much better than me. From now on, you're doing the intro and the outro. That is Radio Caroline at work.
It is it's my side gig. This is my main job, but radio's the side gig.
All right. Enjoy you some college football this weekend, Caroline. Thanks.
Awesome.
All right.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching Up to the Second College Football, and our thanks to Academy Sports and Outdoors. We'll see you next time.